Well, I'm very pleased to be introducing Jules Pipe, the Deputy Mayor in London, responsible for planning, regeneration and skills. Welcome to the Downtown Den, Jules.
Pleasure.
Thank you. And we're going to talk about the economy, the pandemic, the impact of that. Let's start first. How do you think Londoners have reacted and responded to the pandemic?
Well, it's an enormous thing. It's the biggest health and social economic emergency surely we've had since the Second World War. And I think what's so overwhelming about it is that, and so unique about it, is that it affects everybody. You know, there are many things that we could think of that big cities could struggle with, that could hit them from time to time. But probably there's few things that are so levelling and affect people across the board. No one escapes from this, touching the lives of everybody in London. And I think the response so far has been pretty inspiring. You know, that people have been willing to go along with the strictures and the reductions in liberty, and because they just have accepted that it is the best thing to get us through this in the best way possible and the quickest way as well. So that's obviously a positive in the kind of the general public response. But also, most of all, there's the public services and the way that public services have risen to the challenge. And that's the key frontline services, obviously, like health. But there's also those sort of unsung heroes keeping things ticking over, like keeping the bins emptied and the streets clean. And that hasn't necessarily been just carrying on doing business as usual, because obviously even just take street sweeping, and bin collection, they've had to kind of pivot a bit, because obviously, the people aren't at work and they're at home generating more rubbish, recycling and whatever. So all those public services, again, have been touched. No one's escaped from having to kind of adapt to this new way of working. And then, of course, the volunteering that goes on as well, that people have, whether it's volunteering for neighbours or raising money for specific causes. The public transport workers as well, and that's a big issue I think we'll probably be getting onto later in the conversation as well, about how we adapt in this kind of in the new reality.
It does make you quite proud, doesn't it, of London and Londoners' reaction to this. You talk about volunteering, and really, you see some stories about people in the parks, etc., wherever that is in the United Kingdom. But the reality is, if you go around London, or if you've been around London over the last several weeks, it really has been locked down. I mean, there are streets that used to bustle that have been absolutely deserted. It's quite incredible, really.
Yeah, we're seeing London in a whole new way, and actually that's something we could talk about as well, about sort of the space and public space and the way we use public space. And I think that's going to be a big issue for discussion going forward for everyone interested in the built environment and how we design our commercial areas as well. But I think probably I shouldn't sort of pass up the opportunity as well to comment about the kind of very serious nature of the virus, how it really, whereas it is touching everybody, it clearly is touching some parts of the community far worse than others. Obviously, the greatest impact on the elderly, those with underlying health conditions, and clearly BME communities as well. And it really is absolutely right that there's going to be an investigation into that. And the mayor has obviously been calling for that, to look at, why, whether it's really medical reasons it's hitting certain communities harder, but also the existing structural inequalities are undoubtedly having an impact on certain communities, housing, in particular sorts of employment, health. These are structural inequality issues, and that seems sadly to be behind an awful lot of where this, that impact is greatest from the virus.
Yeah, that's interesting. And just staying with that, really, I mean, London is exceptional within the UK, and in many ways, in terms of the world, in that it's in a league of cities in its own right. It's a truly international city, isn't it? And it's fair. I mean, I'm just comparing it to, say, New York. They had it particularly bad, didn't they? I was dealing with some business people over there throughout the lockdown. And why did we fare so much better than somewhere like New York? Is it about the state and federal system over there, or what are the differences? That we've done relatively well in London.
I think we've got through it quicker. I think the compliance of people was a positive thing. I think the reaction of the health services was strong. I do think, well, I mean, it would be wrong of me to kind of prejudging, the kind of inevitable inquiries and an analysis that's going to happen in months and years ahead. I think a big question for all countries, though, is always going to be about how soon people lock down, and also the clarity of message. I think when you look at what's happening in parts of America and in Latin America, where certain governments have taken a different attitude in terms of leadership or lack of leadership. I think and you look at America's interesting. The different state by state differences as well. I think that'll be a rich seam of information to kind of look at there about the point at which they locked down, the nature of the lockdown, and at the point at which they opened up again. Because you've obviously got a lot of commonalities across America, but that difference in how different governors took their states in the direction they took their states in will be useful to understand how best to react to this in the future,
and what lessons can be learned. Yeah. And to turn into City Hall, it's fair to say Sadiq Khan's been on the front foot in terms of coming out and driving the agenda for the capital. Particularly, I mean, transport inevitably has been a big issue. We've gone through various different concerns around that. Broadly got it right? The response has been good and positive, do you think?
Yes. I think it's a strange role, I think, being mayor in this situation. The emergency sort of responses, sort of these military style responses that are put in place across the country, don't really sort of cater much for that mayoral position, and so it's the actual sort of leadership of the practical responses often fall to quite defined sort of military type roles or almost and government appointees, but it's absolutely right that the mayor is seen as a focal point to rally people around, particularly sort of the direction about recovery as well. He's got his part to play in the services that he controls, transport, police, but it's really that leadership about what next, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing a lot of in the coming weeks. And I think there's a real big challenge not to just try and revert back to business as usual. We want to save the economy. We want to get the economy back up on its feet, and crucially, those bits of the economy that are hardest hit in London are some of its most vibrant, both in terms of what they add to the capital, but also the money they make. I mean, the easy thing is easy example of that is the culture and cultural industries in London, and sort of terrible stories on the news this morning about Globe Theatre. Really up against it. Can't see how they get through this without public support, because of normally they don't receive any public support. The Globe Theatre is a completely commercial operation. and it would be unthinkable for London to see that go dark in terms of culture, but also it's a flagship kind of cultural commercial success, and I think a very good kind of example of the commercial cultural offer that London has. So the arts and culture make multi-billion-pound revenues for London, as well as making it an interesting place to live, which therefore has that kind of knock-on that other businesses want to locate here in London. So it's not just a culture of cultural importance. It's kind of economic importance to make sure that these kind of organisations are helped back up on their feet. So there is that kind of restoration part, but that bit that I said about not doing business as usual, so that whole kind of car-based kind of approach, how we're using public space in the public realm, that's going to be very interesting to see how we kind of re-establish that. And maybe social distancing and the requirement to do social distancing will certainly in these summer months make us rethink about how we use the outside of restaurants and bars and things, and dedicate space to those. That would be good for the economy, but also good for establishing perhaps a new and better way, more sort of, dare I say, European way of living out our leisure time.
That would be a positive outcome from this, wouldn't it? A shift in
absolutely.
Though I do get a sense, so I'm in favour of a lot of that personally, but I do get a sense that some people in and around London are unhappy about the increased congestion charge. They're concerned about the wider cycle lanes. I like that. I'm not lycra-clad cyclist. I'm just an average Joe cyclist. To get around London, it's the best way to get around London. So anything that makes that safer, I think, is to be welcomed. But there will be some opposition to that, won't there? There'll be some politics played with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key thing is, obviously to make sure that the transport system doesn't collapse. There's been some rather kind of misplaced criticism about the mayor's fares freeze. I think it was absolutely crucial thing to do over the last 4 years. Without public subsidy, the tube fares, bus fares, have been getting very expensive, and there's an awful lot of people, low-paid workers, who need to get into central London to whether it's to clean the offices, to keep the tubes running, to keep hospitals running in the back with those background jobs, and they're not highly paid. So it was crucial to do something about that, and the money that has cost TfL is less than TfL has lost in government grants. So if we're looking at where to make a real difference, it's not about making the fares hugely expensive again. Actually, we should really look at the fact that London is probably the only city in Europe that where its public transport system isn't subsidised properly by central government. So it's got in this position not through fares freeze, but because of this lack of subsidy, and now the collapse, obviously, in income. And so the mayor had to strike a deal with the government, and the government's given £1 billion and £500 million in a loan, roughly. And there was an expectation from the government that in return the mayor would review those charges and for the congestion charge. And I don't think that they were intending that review would be downwards, unfortunately. So for motorists. So that's brought about that change. But I think to look at it positively, I mean, I'd absolutely agree with you. It's an opportunity to focus on walking and cycling, and for businesses that need to use white vans, the plumbers, they can't take all their kit on the tube. That extra in a day passed on to the customer. Whilst okay, that might put £1 or £2 on each customer's visit that day from, say, a plumber, it's the right thing to do in the sense of putting the charge where it belongs. It's a bit like polluter pays principle. I don't think it's right, really, that people pay with their health in terms of, pollution and NOx emissions, the economic cost of congestion. All that's passed on to other people usually, whereas actually if we have a proper congestion charge that really minimises people travelling in cars and vans that don't need to, and where they have to, it's properly added through the chain to the cost of their businesses and the people who are using their businesses. That's got to be fairer. It's better on the environment, better on congestion, and frees up walking and cycling space. So I think we can make a strong argument that it's the right thing to do.
And just before we move on from transport, just finally, in terms of alternative modes of transport, so I'm thinking small electric vehicles, e-scooters, small e-cars, opportunity to do more on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we really wanted to push ahead anyway on for those essential users of cars and vans. Last mile delivery, it's going to be a huge pressure we're going to come under for increased last mile delivery in London. There's a lot of pressure to find more B8 industrial storage space to do last mile delivery from, and clearly there's going to need to be capacity for charging for electric vehicles. We don't want to see lots of little diesel vans coming out of those B8 storage units. So we, in the London plan, there's a lot of push for increase in infrastructure for that. Someone wants to bring forward a sort of a B8 storage last mile facility. We'd be looking for 100% passive provision and a good chunk of that to actually be active built-in provision for immediate use for electric van charging. And then on, I think this could be also a really great opportunity to fast track the introduction of e-scooters. I do think that whilst I wouldn't want to see the sort of the chaos of that I think some cities have seen with e-scooters, I do think we were perhaps taking too long as a country to really look at trials. I mean, we did have them in one of the mayor's areas of the Olympic Park, because they're not public streets, and so we were allowed to run. LLDC was allowed to run a pilot program there. But it would be good if the Department for Transport could, fast track looking at regularising their use, even if it's on a trial basis.
Yeah, that's good. And you talked about the economy. Let's move on to that. This pandemic is going to have a massive impact in terms of the London economy. You've mentioned culture, which obviously ties into tourism as well, and the hospitality industry. But also, what are the large financial institutions saying, Jules, in terms of the economy for London?
Well, I mean, it's too soon, I think, for people to really know the long-term effects, and it could all pivot really quite quickly if, say, there was a vaccine, or a complete collapse in the kind of the transfer and the R rate, and that really, I think, is going to put a lot of pressure on certain businesses to return things to the way they were. I mean, certainly. That it's too soon to say the impact on cities' growth and the housing need and supply. I mean, we were going to see quite a downturn anyway on what was the predicted growth. I mean, we were on the London plan. We were looking at a growth of 66,000 homes a year needed. That was probably about 48,000 needed for the annual growth, and the balance for the backlog. The latest ONS figures, this is pre-COVID, obviously, this is like 2018, based on 2018 data. But the latest ONS figures look like household growth could be as low as sort of about 25,000. Right. So that's a lot less than, the last 3, 4, 5 years of predictions. And so, it means that we could eat into the housing backlog faster if we still keep motoring. So it's not a reason to take our foot off the pedal. It's interesting to kind of be mindful of those figures, I think, as we head into a head into and it's not going to be about, I say, a collapse because of COVID. Actually, we really needed to reassess some of this stuff even before that.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, as I say, it's crucial that we do keep house building going. We've got a huge backlog to tackle. A lot of people living in unsuitable accommodation. We've got, under the Deputy Mayor for Housing, the Mayor set up a housing delivery task force, and that's looking at ways with the house building industry and registered providers as well, looking at how we can sort of continue to deliver at a fast pace and scale as soon as we're possibly able to. I mean, there's obviously been a downturn there with obviously social distancing on sites. Interestingly, many commercial sites continue to some degree. The closure of sites seem to impact housing sites far more. A lot of the house builders kind of downed tools in response to the requirements for social distancing. I don't know whether that's because just the nature of working within homes and, you know, once they need the fitting out, it's just too hard. It's been too hard to ensure that social distancing. Whereas on commercial projects, more space, big construction, maybe they've just found that easier to keep going. But yeah, we're looking at the ways in which we can help to make sure that we can turn that situation around. Crucially, though, going forward, you know, and this applied with or without COVID, a big chunk of what needs to be built does need to be truly affordable. Just building out huge amounts of market, hoping that, well, as long as a percentage of that is affordable, we'll address the situation. We need something like 60 to 70% of what's built out to be genuinely affordable, whether it's low-cost social rent, some of it could be intermediate housing. But there needs to be about 5 times as much grant going into social housing as currently goes into it to actually deliver the balance. There's no point in building all this housing, even if you could suddenly wave a magic wand, get everybody back on site, build at the highest possible levels we've been doing. Well, a lot of it will remain unsold because people just simply can't afford to buy it.
And so you think, from what I hear, you think the regeneration initiatives across places like Ealing and Greenwich and elsewhere will sustain themselves, will continue at a steady pace?
I think they will, because you know, once they can, you know, get the practicalities of people back on site and getting that motoring, because there is the demand there. A lot of what's been permissioned under this mayor, approaching a third of it will be affordable housing. I think a lot of developers are finding that having that large percentage of affordable is actually quite helpful, because the grant that comes with that enables them to actually get on and build that first. It actually provides them with some certainty to proceed. I think we've thankfully gone away from the days where people want to just build out the commercial and the affordable at the end of the project, if it can be afforded. So that's a positive, and I'd like to think that those schemes are going to proceed, and we'll see a lot of the affordable built up front end.
And what about office and retail developments? I'm thinking about Victoria Station, which is not far from where I am, but also Euston. HS2 is obviously a big development around Euston, isn't it? How are these going to be impacted by, not just by the pandemic, but also perhaps by Brexit as well? Yeah,
I mean, there are a number of places, you know, like Victoria's a good example, Waterloo as well. You know, brilliant plans being brought forward for Waterloo. And obviously Euston as well. I think a lot of these developments will still go ahead, probably in line with what's envisaged in the commercial part. I think where we're really up against it, though, both as a city and nationally, are those kind of retail projects. the ones that are dominated by retail. With the ongoing uncertainty about Croydon and the Whitgift Centre, while Westfield kind of rethink about really what the offer should be there, and that's not just that place, just London or Westfield. Actually, it's all retail, all around the world. People are having to rethink this. I was really surprised going into the COVID crisis to learn that actually the penetration of supermarkets and other kind of similar retail had only got about 10% online. And yet, a few months into this crisis now, people have, that has shifted more in a couple of months than it shifted in 10 years. And so therefore that will inevitably have further impacts on those kind of retail projects and what people envisaged would be in them. So there is inevitably going to be more rethink on that. As I say, it's kind of a recurring theme. It's not that COVID actually created the problem, but it's highlighted it and focused people's minds on it, whether it's what we've been talking about earlier about the use of public space, pollution, the nature of retail. These are all themes that people have been actively exploring over the last couple of years. They're all kind of at the heart of the Mayor's Good Growth by Design agenda that has helped inform policies within the new draft London plan. I say COVID hasn't created those problems, but it has certainly highlighted how crucial they are for us to kind of address them.
And that just leads to the issue about the new normal, whether there's going to be a new normal or we'll just go back to what was. So there is the potential for rethinking open space and how we travel around the city, and it's accelerated the reconfiguration of retail. Do you want to make any predictions in terms of what the new normal will look like, Jules?
Well, predictions, that's always a tricky thing. I can certainly say hopes. I'd like to think that those kind of struggling parades of shops, those bits of forgotten or dying retail, let's say struggling retail, places that before COVID we were kind of engaging with. We brought out a high streets piece of work, which was looking at 10 case studies about how 10 places in London were kind of very mindful about what the challenges that they were facing and how could they pivot, how could they do something differently to retain their place as a kind of a centre of the community. And, a row of shops that people just go in, hand over cash, come out with a bag of stuff, and them all being pretty much like that. That's moved on, and there's got to be a different kind of offer, and whether that's some workspace. And although people are saying, "Oh, workspace is dead now, we're all used to working from home," actually, I think that's wrong. I think that's not going to be the case. People, I think that. Don't want to segue too far from what I was saying, but I think there are real potential mental health issues that we're storing up about expecting people to turn a corner of their home into an office and work in isolation. And that's actually if you were lucky enough to have a home big enough to be able to do that, and many people don't. So I don't think the office is dead, far from it. I think there will be a need for sort of community workspaces, maker spaces, all sorts of a greater mix than we used to. Cultural spaces, more restaurants, all that kind of mix can play out in high streets, big and small. And I think that's my hope, that bit of closure on the street space from cars, and restaurants, perhaps cafes being able to spill out more into those public spaces. I think we should really be working on a positive vision about how we go back to living our lives, about shopping and leisure time, and actually work time as well.
Well, perhaps more of a community hub, and people staying a bit more local, shopping a bit more local, more independence, getting online and interacting with their local customers within the community and things. There's been some of that going on, hasn't there?
Yeah, and it's something that the London plan as well, the mayors, intend to publish London plan has always been strong on. It's about regarding London and pushing for London to be a polycentric city, not a, the central activity zone is absolutely crucial to London's position as a global world city. And we're supportive in the plan of maintaining the central activity zone, maintaining the ring around it of supportive industries, whether it's, artisanal gin for the Barbican or last minute printers for the legal profession in Clerkenwell, so that supportive ring of light industrial space helping the CAS. But we've very much not then thought of then what surrounds that as just kind of residential dormitory and people just pile into the centre for work. That would be mad. Not least, as I've always said, we'd have to plan for Crossrails 3, 4 and 5 to keep up that kind of movement into the centre. So no, what we really want to push for is a polycentric city, but beyond the CAS and its support system, its ecosystem, that we need to nurture. We need to nurture those kind of centres around that would mean that people don't have to go into the centre. They need to be well connected. We need good transport links for people to use when they need to get about. But we shouldn't be planning on building, as I say, this residential dormitory and transport based on just everybody having to get in at 9 a.m. in the morning and leave at 5 at the end of the day and all go back out to their residential areas. Got to be more creative than that.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be. That's the positive, isn't it? Let's finish by talking about, just briefly, about the highs and lows of the pandemic for you. What have you enjoyed? What have you not enjoyed? What are you going to do differently in future because of it?
Wow. I think the biggest impact for me has actually been my children. I've got 2 primary school age children. And I worry about the amount of time that they're away from school and we're about then to go into a summer break, and so they'll have ended up losing about half a year. Yeah, I'm sure they can make that back, but I suppose it's just kind of the waste of the time. Actually, I think is too much TV, too much online gaming with their friends, that kind of thing. So it would be nice to be able to get a bit more structure back into their lives. My partner and I, we, like so many people, it's a real challenge to kind of be able to fit work in and provide that structure. I think there are parents up and down the country who have got a new, renewed amount of respect for primary school teachers and what they do. Yeah. So yeah, that's my biggest thing. I miss the face-to-face with people. I think this has been great. I've enjoyed chatting with you, but I think the Zoom meeting culture is quite tiring, both in the nature of them being back to back. You don't get that break-up moving from, even if it's just to another office for a different meeting in the same building. Certainly no travel between meetings. That kind of, comfort break, getting the cup of tea between things, that gets more tricky. And also the lack of other stimulus in meetings. You're really relying on what you hear. Although you do see people, it's mainly talking heads, so there's less of that those visual clues in a group meeting. So I think people are finding them harder work, tougher going than those face-to-face, those really face-to-face meetings. So yeah, it'll be good eventually to get back to some of that human contact.
Thank you. Well, thanks for all the work that you're doing, and thanks for joining us in the Downtown Den. Really appreciate it, Jules. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks.